I mean, like, I don't know what Albert Einstein's tweets would have been like, or Darwin's, or like, God knows, Tolstoy was a complete weirdo. Like, they're like, people are weird. They're weird, and they can be utter. I mean, Mozart. Can you imagine Mozart's Twitter feed? Like, that guy was a Looney Tunes. Like, people can be brilliant geniuses in one arena and completely either monstrous or ridiculous or superstitious in another domain, and we now get to see like all of that about a person.
I'm Jon Favreau. Welcome to Offline. My guest today is Chris Hayes, host of MSNBC's All In with Chris Hayes and the podcast Why Is This Happening? The reason I've been dying to talk to him for this show is because of a New Yorker piece he wrote a few months ago titled, "On the Internet, We're Always Famous." Chris argues that the internet's most radical change to our lives isn't who gets to speak, but what we get to hear. I invited Chris on to talk about this article and break down the central thesis of his piece, which is the distinction between the recognition that we crave as humans and the attention that we get online. Here's Chris Hayes. Chris Hayes, welcome to Offline.
It's good to be here, offline, online with you, remotely. We were supposed to do this in person, but now we're doing offline, online.
COVID got me. So you wrote a piece for The New Yorker back in September that I've been wanting to talk to you about since the first episode of this podcast. And it's not because you argue that the internet is bad. Most guests I've talked to have come to that conclusion, at least partially bad. It's sort of why you think the internet is bad. You write, the most radical change to our shared social lives isn't who gets to speak, it's what we can hear. Can you talk about what you mean by that and why you think it's an even bigger change than who gets to speak?
We are creatures, like all creatures, who are bound by certain perceptual constraints of like how much information we can process. And in fact, a huge part of what our systems are doing, whether at the pre-conscious or conscious level, is like constraining that. Because the fact of the matter is, there's a theoretically infinite amount of stimulus at all times present in every single moment. Like right now, I'm looking at you. There's a bookcase behind you. I could my attention could just like focus on like each individual book behind you. And if it did that, like my system would go haywire. I wouldn't be able to like focus on you and like actually talk. So we actually have this incredibly, unbelievably sophisticated system that's like screening out stuff all the time. And one of the big changes now is at the conscious level, not the pre-conscious level, right? So at the perceptual level, we're still doing that because we can't really mess with that wiring. But we also have to do that at the conscious level, which is like we have to focus on stuff. We have to like not listen to stuff. And I compare it to just being in a room where like if you were at a cocktail party and like you and I are having a conversation, but literally everyone has a bullhorn. Like it just would be very hard just at a basic level to function, where I would be a little overwhelmed. And if you've ever been in those situations, if you've ever been in a room of like, 4-year-olds at a birthday party, where everyone actually is screaming, it's very, very hard. It's very hard to focus. And that's just like sort of at a basic level. Humans are weird. We're all weird. We all have our weird tics. We all say stuff that's dumb and wrong all the time. And so it's just necessarily the case that like we're just hearing a lot of that all the time in at a level that we never have before. Like access to publishing your inner thoughts is so distributed now. And access to hearing people's inner thoughts is so distributed now in a way that's just totally unprecedented, right? In human civilization. Like it's an order of magnitude different. That experience of the world, I think, is a profound, almost like epochal break in terms of how we make sense of the world, how our politics work, how our society functions. You're constantly hearing this sort of cacophony of opinions and takes and views and jokes and sometimes great stuff, like things you wouldn't hear otherwise. That's just overwhelming in some ways it's just sort of overwhelming the basic gatekeeping focal faculties that we have and need to kind of like function.
Well, I think it's a fascinating thesis because there are so many consequences you can point to that come from this. You were basically just talking about what it does to our sort of sense of attention. It distracts us, but it also like deeply affects how we present ourselves to the world, how we interact with others, the way that we socialize and interact with each other. Like, what made you, I'm interested in what made you sit down and write this piece. When do you think the internet became this place where we all amassed what you call basically a totalitarian ability to surveil almost anyone in the world? Like, when did you notice it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it happened. I would say, the two big developments, I think, are the creation, the sort of widespread distribution of smartphones, which there's several billion of them. There's more smartphones in the world than toilets, I think, which is a sort of an amazing thing to think of. So the widespread distribution of smartphones combined with social media, right? So, it really has really entered its own kind of, period of completeness, I think, in the last few years. But yeah, I think I write in the piece that, this basic distinction between public and private, which at least in the Western canonical tradition reaches back thousands of years, right? This idea of like there's this sphere that's private and that sphere that's public, and we have enshrined it in law and custom and tradition, whatever, and thousands of years go into creating that. We just ripped it down in about a decade, just completely, with not really a whole thought. So it's incredible how much that boundary has been eviscerated. What's public and what's private. You see this all the time too, when someone will, a tweet will go viral or something will go viral. Sometimes it's just a dating story on TikTok. And it's you can respond, well, at some level, you put that out publicly, but the person's understanding of how public that was completely different than how public it became. There's spheres of publicness. And the other thing about it is I think it's not great for how we think about each other. There's lots of relationships a person has casually in one's life, like your barber, or neighbors, or parents at the softball team. I don't know, man, they might have some crazy ass ideas about a lot of stuff. I don't know if they do or not. We have a really lovely time talking about our kids and who's fielding ground balls well. I don't need to know their terrible views about things if they have them. If you're listening, fellow parents, I don't think you have terrible views. I just think that it's just a perfect example. There's an entire universe of relationships that in some ways are dependent on a little bit of that public-private division. You are a certain way in a certain context with a person that creates casual social bonds. That again, is being if you see them, if you have that conversation, then you go home on Facebook and they're well, tell Brandon no vaccine for me. And it's oh, well, okay.
Now I have to not talk. No,
but it's also I don't want to feel that way about that. But again, I think I honestly and this is me talking with from my Irish Catholic upbringing, sometimes a little repression's good. Sometimes a little not everyone sharing everything is good for the social lubricant. We can have small talk and just kind of be a little everyone not knowing everyone's, and I don't even just mean that about politics. I mean everything, right? That those sort of divisions, those tiers of sociality, those tiers of public versus private persona have been stripped down and replaced with the totalitarian panopticon of constant surveillance, which is that everything is constantly in the public domain.
Yeah, and I don't think we really understand how different it was before. Now when you meet someone, when you're about to meet someone, you Google them all the time. And you know a whole bunch of shit about that person that you never would have known in the old world. We're interesting because of the age we are, that we sort of straddle both of these worlds, right?
Yes.
At some point,
exactly.
There's going to be generations who don't ever remember this, and then probably our parents' generation still don't quite understand it, but we've sort of been on the border of this. But knowing a ton about every single person that you meet, and then after meeting them, knowing even more, is just going to change fundamentally the way that we interact with one another. And you make a really interesting point. You argue that the era of mass fame is upon us. But you point out that even though the experience of fame and being known by strangers is still foreign to most people, the possibility of mass fame now haunts online life, which you accurately point out is increasingly just life. How do you think the possibility that you might suddenly become known by millions of strangers shapes the version of ourselves that we present to the world?
That's a great question. I mean, let me just take a step back and say that. So part of the point of the essay and part of the thing that I've been wrestling with. So one of the things that's hard, and I think you've been thinking this through because I've listened to this podcast. Like, you don't want to be old man yells at cloud, and you don't want to be like kids these days, and you don't want to like it. Like, it used to be like this, and now it's like this, and I don't like the way it is. And there's also this question of like, well, what's new and what's not, right? So like, what are we dealing with? And that was actually one of the starting places for this essay. I was like, okay, what is actually new here? There's this streetcar photo of everyone like commuting, and they've all got their heads buried in the newspaper, and it's like someone made a joke about like, oh, look at these kids on their iPhones. Like, it's like, right, certain things here. One of the things, I think there's a bunch of things that are genuinely new. One of the things is this relationship of being known by strangers. So one of the arguments I'm making in the essay is that's actually like a really rarefied human experience in the history of human civilization. An infinitesimally small number of people could have the experience of being known by strangers. The king, some sort of royalty, some pirate of infamy. And then when you get to the industrial age, that category gets bigger. People like Darwin was famous in his time, as was Dickens and Tolstoy and actors of the time. Like, there's real fame that happens, right? It's just never been mass distributed the way it is now. That you could be known and seen and responded to by a stranger at the scale that happens now has never existed in human society before. That experience, and part of the reason I'm writing about it is like, I kind of know a little bit about that. Because I have a very weird job that puts me in the public eye. And I know a little bit about how psychologically unmooring being known by strangers is, because human relationships develop, evolve, and are created in the context of mutuality. When you take the mutuality away, you've got something very weird. So all my relationships that I develop over the course of my development as a human being are relationships where I know the person, they know me, or relationships that are one directional. You know the person, they don't know you, right? So you might have idols you look up to. You might have famous people, you have heroes, right? But the other way around, that's totally absent from your human development. That's now everywhere all the time. That is a weird, distinct form of human relationship. It does weird things to you psychologically. And to circle back around to your point, it makes you think of the projection and performance of yourself in a totally different way, because you are now thinking about how strangers view you, and thinking about strangers view you and what they will say about you, how they will judge you outside the context of mutual relationships means you start to emphasize certain things that are ripped from the life world of human love, affection, solidarity, and camaraderie.
Yeah. I mean, you talk a lot about how mass fame, means we're constantly trying to impress other people. I think that's where you're getting at there. Doesn't it also mean that we're constantly trying to avoid embarrassing ourselves? Like, that's what I think about for all the people who do not yet know mass fame, who might be like, yeah, well, I'm not famous, so this doesn't really apply to me, right? But like, the knowledge that at any moment, something you do in your private life may suddenly become public, no matter who you are or what job you have. Like, that has really got to fuck with people's head and their sense of self and how they behave just going through their lives, right?
Right. And I make the point, right, that like the idea of the totalitarian state was that it created incentives on behavior, right? Like, so even if you weren't being spied upon, you knew you would be, and so it would change the way you acted. And like, I think there's a corollary here about if everything is happening in public. Now, the thing that makes all this so complicated, right, is that it's voluntary. I mean, it is and it isn't, right? It's sort of compelled now, I think, in the generation below us by social norms. It's compelled by extremely sophisticated engineering that, has produced a world in which, there's a sort of addictive quality of the thing. But yeah, I think it does change behavior. And even for the people that are listening to this and thinking like, well, no one knows me. It's like, you've interacted with a stranger online, most likely. And even that is weird. Again, in the context of human history. And so, I think that and again, this is really generational. I think that, the younger you are, the more native you are to the environment of constant social media life world, the more that like it's just what the performance of self is. And again, that's not new too. It's just the scale, right? Because like when you're 16, you're performing yourself all the time, laboriously. I mean, it's just like, what do I wear and who am I? Am I this kind of person? I'm that kind of person. You're thinking about that all the time. And some of that never goes away. I mean, we're humans and we think about all this stuff all the time. But again, the scale and the kind of input you can receive. And again, yes, that specter of like virality or that specter of blowing up or something, or what that would mean, just looms over all of it.
My theory of this is that it's making people who are not in politics and people who don't even pay attention that much to politics act like politicians or public figures, right? Because you want to both capture the attention that a politician does, and you want to be respected like many politicians do, but you also are not really allowed to think out loud, make mistakes out loud, grapple with difficult questions out loud in public anymore, because if you say something dumb, that could be it for you.
And I think there's a few things about that so interesting. So one of them is like, I've been seeing people with like Elon Musk talking about like, sometimes you'll see people talk about someone like this dumbass, and like, it's like, yeah, Elon Musk's tweets don't make him seem particularly bright, I have to say. But it's also like, if you ever zoom into like, I mean, like, I don't know what Albert Einstein's tweets would have been like, or Darwin's, or like, God knows, Tolstoy was a complete weirdo. Like, they're like, people are weird. They're weird, and they can be utter. I mean, Mozart, can you imagine Mozart's Twitter feed? Like, that guy was a Looney Tunes. Like, people can be brilliant geniuses in one arena and completely either monstrous or ridiculous or superstitious in another domain. And we now get to see like all of that about a person.
Yeah.
Sort of a fascinating way.
No, I always thought that because like I had met Elon Musk a few times before he was really big on Twitter, and I would always tell people, the guy is fucking weird. He is one of the weirdest people I've ever met. They'd be like, yeah, but he's a genius. He's amazing, blah, blah, blah. And then he started tweeting a lot, and it's like, yeah, see? Now everyone gets to see that, and you didn't even have to meet him.
Right.
Because we hear everyone's thoughts all the time.
It's also the fact that like, so wait, to go back to this politician idea, I think this is interesting and worth pressing on, because I think there's something a little complicated happening. And I sort of agree. Let me just put my cards on the table, which is like, I'm working on a book about attention. And I'm in the grips of wrestling with this stuff. And I think that sometimes when you have a thesis you're working on, it makes you a little monomaniacal, where like you want to fit everything into that framework. So I'm probably guilty of that a little bit. But on the politician thing, what's interesting, right, is that in some ways it's a little bit the opposite. And here's what I mean. The notion that you had when someone like say he's like a politician or he's very political, generally what you mean by that is he or she doesn't say anything that offends people. They're kind of trying to be liked by all people at all times. But there's another personality produced by social media too, which is the opposite of that, which is essentially negative attention seeking.
Donald Trump.
Right. Or Elon Musk now.
Right.
And negative attention seeking is the opposite of like being like a politician. But there's something about the ping of endorphin. Basically, my thesis is that someone paying attention to you is kind of the lowest rung on the ladder of human social need. So like on the bottom is attention, and then above that is recognition. And then above that is love. And like love is rarefied, and you're only really going to be truly loved by people you have mutual relationships with. Recognition is something that you can receive from people that don't know you. Like they see you. Attention is the lowest. Attention can be positive or negative. There's all kinds of ways to get attention. I think we like attention, and the structure of the networks incentivize attention, which also in a weird way incentivizes a whole form of performance. It's actually the opposite of a politician. It's like negative attention seeking. So that's another really weird part of that, because in other parts of life, that is really rare. In the context of like mutual IRL interactions, you sometimes meet people who are kind of like performative assholes, and they're a pain in the ass. It's not that common a trait, but it's really common online.
Offline is brought to you by Blue Moon. Talk about a time when you crave something outside the norm, like a special meal, a chat with an old friend, or breaking from your usual routine. Is that outside the norm, a chat with an old friend? Sure. What if there was a beer that could give you that same invigorating feeling? What would you say, guys?
I'd be excited about that.
I'd say sure.
I drink that right now.
Sounds good.
Okay. Good. Well, you know what? Blue Moon isn't like other beers. It's one of a kind. From its refreshing flavor with Valencia orange peel for a subtle sweetness and hints of coriander. Bet you couldn't tell that there was coriander in there, huh?
That's what that is.
There is.
I'm not good at knowing what spices are, you know?
Me neither. Blue Moon Belgian White is one-of-a-kind beer that's made brighter. It's carefully crafted and full-flavored with refreshing notes and a smooth, creamy finish. Blue Moon is made brighter to awaken you to the brightness in each moment. Best served in a glass with a signature orange garnish to showcase its beautiful hazy color. Check out Blue Moon Light Sky, Citrus Wheat, and Tropical Wheat. Two refreshingly light, citrusy wheat beers, checking in at just 95 calories per 12 ounces. All are perfect for hanging out with friends at home or at the bar. Break away from the same old beer. Blue Moon Belgian White is one of a kind every time. Get Blue Moon Belgian White, Light Sky, and Moon Haze delivered by visiting get.bluemoonbeer.com/offline to see your delivery options. That's get.bluemoonbeer.com/offline. Blue Moon, made brighter. Celebrate responsibly. Blue Moon Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado Ale. Offline is brought to you by Shopify. That's the sound of another sale on Shopify, the all-in-one commerce platform to start, run, and grow your business. Shopify gives entrepreneurs the resources once reserved for big business. So upstarts, startups, and established businesses alike can sell everywhere, synchronize online and in-person sales, and effortlessly stay informed. Scaling your business is a journey of endless possibility. Believe me, Crooked Media started out selling, a few t-shirts here and there, and now we're selling everything. Now we got Dan Pfeiffer on mugs, along with Doug Emhoff.
Doug on a mug.
Doug on a mug, Dan on a mug. We're not stopping there. Because success is a million milestones on a forever evolving path. Wow, that's beautiful. Shopify powers millions of businesses from first sale to full scale. Reach customers online and across social networks with an ever-growing suite of channel integrations and apps, including Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Pinterest, and more. More than a store, Shopify grows with you. This is possibility powered by Shopify. Go to shopify.com/offline, all lowercase, for a free 14-day trial and get full access to Shopify's entire suite of features. Grow your business with Shopify today. Go to shopify.com/offline right now. Shopify.com/offline. Offline is brought to you by Blue Chew. It's time to dig yourself out of that winter hibernation. Spring is here, and it's time to get sprung with Blue Chew.
Okay.
That's right, Tommy. This episode is sponsored by Blue Chew. Blue Chew is a unique online service that delivers the same active ingredients as Viagra and Cialis, but in chewable tablets and at a fraction of the cost. You can take them anytime, a day or a night. I mean, that's up to you. So you can plan ahead or be ready whenever an opportunity arises. The process is simple. You sign up at bluechew.com, consult with one of their licensed medical providers, and once you're approved, you'll receive your prescription within days. The best part, it's all done online. So no visits to the doctor's office, no awkward conversations, and no waiting in line at the pharmacy. Let's see. Please riff on this thought starter. They always say first impressions are important. What about lasting impressions? I love it.
Lasting
What about lasting impressions?
are
What about them?
good. I think they're going for a double entendre.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
think so, too.
I see.
it's about
Impressions that last.
Keep it up, John.
I see. Keep it up. Keep it going.
So should I keep going? Do you think I can last a little longer? So if you can benefit from extra
Power
confidence when it's
through.
time to perform, Blue Chew can help.
Think about
We've got a
baseball.
special
Keep reading.
And we've got a special deal for our listeners. Try Blue Chew free when you use our promo code Crooked at checkout. Just pay $5 shipping. That's bluechew.com, promo code Crooked to receive your first month free. Visit bluechew.com for more details and important safety information. And we thank Blue Chew for sponsoring the podcast. You mentioned recognition, and a big part of your piece actually sort of focuses on the distinction between attention and recognition. Could you talk about that a little more here? Because like what is the difference of being recognized by another person and getting recognition from them than just getting attention, which is lower on the ladder?
Right. So I use this this Russian emigre philosopher Alexander Koyev's framework. He was a really fascinating guy. Family was a wealthy Russian family, fled the Bolshevik Revolution. He goes to France. He's a Parisian scholar. He then goes on to be a bureaucrat who's like one of the foundational bureaucrats in creating what would become the EU. At that point, it's the European Common Market. really interesting guy, gave a very famous series of lectures about Hegel's phenomenology of spirit in Paris that was attended by some of the most formidable and influential thinkers of the 20th century. And in fact, Koyev's theory was very influential on Francis Fukuyama's book about the end of history. Just a footnote. He's reading Hegel, and Hegel's talking about what it means to be human. And Hegel's got this whole master-slave dynamic, which Koyev builds on, and basically says, he talks about he talks about really interesting paradox in what he calls the master-slave relationship, right? So there's the master-slave, the master who stands over the slave and can tell the slave to do whatever he wants to do. The master seeks recognition because seeking recognition is what we want as humans. And what recognition is to be seen as human by another human. It's a condition of mutuality. You see me as a human, and I know you see me as a human because you're another human. And what Koyev says about the master-slave dynamic is that the paradox, in some ways, the tragedy of the master-slave dynamic, is the slave is not seen as human by the master. And so the master cannot get recognition from the slave. He's trapped without recognition because he doesn't understand the full humanity of the slave. He doesn't actually see the slave as human. He can't be satisfied by the slave recognizing him. And I think there's like a profound thing about that. But what he goes on to argue is that the core of being human in some ways is the seeking of recognition, that we grow towards recognition the way a plant grows towards the light. That what recognition is again, being seen as fully human by another human. Now, again, that's lower than like being loved or all these things, but it's higher than attention. Attention is just the eyes on you. Attention can be positive or negative. Recognition is deeper, right? Like I fully internalize your humanness in front of me, before me. And
it seems like recognition also has to do with a level of empathy for the other person, right? That I can see you as human, I can stand in your shoes, I can understand what you're going through, where you're coming from, because I can see sort of the common threads between us that make us both human. And with attention, you don't necessarily go past that barrier of really understanding the other person or empathizing with the other person. You just experience the other person.
That's right. And you experience them as an input or as something that is, again, paying attention. It's pinging your attentional endorphins. But I think the thing that's really interesting about recognition is it can be deep or it can be more shallow. Like I've had moments on the subway of deep recognition that are fleeting, that I don't actually know the story of the person that I'm recognizing or that's recognizing me, but even just a human moment of like a person gives up the seat for my kid, because I'm with my 3 kids on the subway and we've got 2 wedged in, and there's something about that interaction where there's recognition. It's not just they're paying attention to me. It's like, oh, I see you as a human with this need and I'm going to respond to it. And that's a good feeling. And I think in the same way that, the way that addiction works is every drug we could become addicted to or get high from, we can get addicted to or get high from because we have endogenous cell receptors that are the same structure as the drug. Right. So that's the way it works. The drug comes in and it is like the same Lego block as the little things floating around our brains, and it fits into that receptor and it lights up the brain. Attention is the online attention is like the drug version of what our endogenous receptors for recognition are. So like the thing we have that lights up the brain in the right way within us in a natural sense is recognition. And that's what we seek. And there's a synthetic version of it that the internet provides that is attention, that sort of lights up the same receptors, but can't produce the same spiritual fulfillment. And I mean spiritual in the broader way, and then creates that sort of pattern of pleasure-seeking addiction that, you see in, classic chemical addiction.
I mean, we've talked a lot on this show about all the ways the internet is breaking our brains. You seem to be saying that it's like breaking our souls.
Yeah, no, my focus is much less on it. I almost say nothing about our cognitive. I mean, I said at the beginning a little about the informational processing, but I think it's doing something much more profound about who we are as people and how we interact and how we think about other fellow humans. And yeah, I think it is doing something pretty profound there. Now, again, there is this other, it can do the opposite. I mean, I have to say, I have become partly, I tell myself that this is for work, which it is. I'm writing this book about attention. I've become a big TikTok enjoyer. Now, I love TikTok. To me is like, I'm sure there's lots of corners of it that are terrible. The corner of TikTok I have is pretty delightful. It's a lot of people making sandwiches and then cutting them open and showing them to the camera, which is just, I can watch that forever. It's people restoring very old pieces of machinery or equipment, which look terrible. And then after 2 minutes, look bright, spinning new, after they spent like clearly like 150 hours where like the actual thing they restored maybe cost $10.99. So it's just a hilarious undertaking. All that said, like, one of the things I like about TikTok now, and I used to like about Twitter, and I think has happened less, is that you would have these moments of someone just making an incredibly funny joke out of nowhere, or an incredibly keen observation, where, humans are unbelievably magically talented, and talent, wit, musical genius, voice, it's all distributed across the population that in no way correlates to like race, class, affluence, privilege. Like people's ability to be funny, like all that stuff, like is not constrained and not predetermined or ordered by all the social hierarchies that we impose on humans, right? And the internet at its best can explode that in such a wonderful way where, and it's when it explodes it in a wonderful way, there is a moment of recognition, at least in your, I think you can feel like you can laugh at a joke. They may not be feeling the recognition, but you see like a real human consciousness behind it.
Mm-hmm. Well, wasn't that the original hope of the internet, right? That it could that somehow if all of us are connected, that it could sort of dissolve lines of class and race and geography and help us bring us close together. So then what happened? and not just what happened, but then I start to wonder, there's usually the tech geniuses make this argument that it's not the structure of these social platforms. It's just us. It's human nature. This is what happens. There are good parts when we come together and connect, and there are bad parts when we come together and connect. And the bad parts are because we're human and we have failings and we're not perfect, right? And so what is it about the structure of the internet that has made this worse and made the good parts that you're talking about so much rarer?
Yeah, I don't think I have an answer to that yet. I think what I would say is that to your point, right? Like, I think that there's the two extreme versions of this are the tech people say it's just humans. And if you put a lot of humans together, you get good stuff and bad stuff. Like you get flash mobs and ethnic killing, it just depends like how it works out. The opposite end of the argument is that it's the algorithm. We hear this a lot, right? That or it's the financial incentives that are selecting for certain kinds of human interaction. I think there's a lot to both of those. Like I do think the fact that maximizing for attention, which is what at a business level all these frameworks have to do, like that is going to have negative consequences because attention is not recognition. Attention is not human connection. Attention is a very different thing. It's colorblind, meaning if the full texture of human emotional life is in color, like attention is just black and white. Like you're paying attention to a bad tweet and the algorithm is like, woo, it's working. It's like, whoa, someone said something horrible and monstrous. It's like, it's working. We're doing it. It's like, wait a second. That's not good. So I think there's something a little self-serving about the tech people's like, it's human beings. On the other hand, I do think there's an oversimplified kind of like the villainous tech people got together and created this thing that's made us bad and really we're good. And if we're outside its context, and I think people, again, I think that those of us who were on the very early internet, and I'm one of them, like who were on message boards and Usenet groups before all of this was monetized, all of it was selected for, like can recognize that the sort of both sides of that argument, which is that like there was a lot of bad human behavior in those forums all the time, but also they were better than what we have now. So like, it's both the case that like Trolls are as old as the internet. That the history of trolling is really fascinating in terms of how it developed, and how content moderation problems are as old as the internet. Like people posting porn in comments or saying nasty things, doxing, like all this stuff is as old as the internet, basically, more or less. Patrolling, antisocial behavior was an early collective problem of the open internet. The solutions to were some of which were good, some of which were not good. All of that existed, but it was still better than the monetized version we have now. Now, the way it wasn't better, though, was that it was a tiny, tiny little subgroup of people. And that subgroup of people was extremely demographically unrepresentative, not the sort of wide cross-section of humanity. So again, like now I'm flipping back, toggling to the other argument against myself, right? So like maybe you can say, well, the ability to patrol social boundaries in that part of the internet was produced by the relative homogeneity of people who were online. When you put the entire world online, all of that stuff falls apart, and this is what you get. And if you like the old internet, it's only because you kind of like being in like the essentially online version of like the Yale Club, where like, if like T. Richardson III had won too many martinis, someone could politely ask him to leave, so there's like a little bit of that argument as well. But I do think there's a complex interplay between the monetization that's happening, the way that the monetization selects for attention as the ultimate outcome, and the fact that humans enter into conflict each other when they interact in mass. That is like a human, as a rule of human interaction. And I don't mean violent conflict. I just mean like friction. Like,
right. I mean, you just said that you, or at least telling yourself that you are studying this for work and writing this book for work. I'm interested in how you think it shapes politics, because obviously, changes like this that shape our own individual behavior ladder up to shape the politics that we have. And it's always struck me that a fundamental requirement of democracy, and a healthy democracy, is the ability to recognize each other and to sort of get to that level of recognition and not just attention. And if we are not able to reach that level of recognition with one another, how can we have a democracy that actually holds together?
Yeah, I think that part of it is really dangerous. I mean, Michelle Goldberg had this line that I think about all the time. She's like, I don't know, like maybe 20 years ago, people were sending out Christmas cards, their entire family holding guns. But if so, I didn't know about it. And that was probably for the best. Like, just a good point. Like, I don't know. Yeah. If people did that, if people did that with their circles, I guess fine. Like, I didn't have to know about it. And it didn't make me, I didn't have to be like, why is your 5-year-old, So I think there's, yes, this sort of dehumanization. I think particularly when the dehumanization gets run through this, again, the machine that incentivizes attention over recognition, it exacerbates the issue. The other one way that I think, there's a lot of ways I think it's affected our politics. I do think it's the case that it has, to make the argument again for it, right? You can hear more people. We can hear what you can hear. What you can hear if you're a staffer for a US senator is way, way, way larger than what it was 20 years ago. And I think there's an argument that that's probably for the better, right? Because like, what could you hear? Well, the local, you knew the local reporters, the Washington reporters, and then like the big donors and there's a pretty constrained group of people you were hearing from. Maybe the phone calls, you'd tally that. Now it's like, and I do think that that's had some positive effects. I mean, I think this sort of question of representation, the fact that people who did not have a way of being heard before can be heard now does actually have tangible effects. And in fact, you see people decrying this, right? Like there's this whole counter narrative that's emerged about how like it's the sort of relatively unrepresented avant-garde of Twitter that drives democratic policymaking and politics in a way that's like fundamentally dangerous. I don't think that's true, but I think there's like an interesting debate happening there that is along the axis of a real thing that's happening, if you know what I mean. Like there's something that has changed in how in what feedback mechanisms produce political, particularly at the staffer level. Who are you worried about hearing from? What, and I think that's changed, and whether that's been good or bad, I think is an interesting debate. The other thing I think is really weird, I think of this as is the way that intention is incentivized. So JD Vance is an interesting example to me, and I did this riff on my show. So after Alec Baldwin very horrifyingly, accidentally, as far as we can tell, I think there's no reason to think it wasn't, shot and killed the cinematographer on a film he was working on. It's a big story. It was just, profoundly upsetting in every direction. I mean, there's just like one of those stories that this is awful. What an awful human tragedy. And JD Vance is running for senator in Ohio. Now, again, I say this all the time, not to be the dead horse. Ohio is not Mississippi, and it's not Wyoming. Donald Trump won Ohio by 8 points. Like Barack Obama won it twice. Again, I don't think Joe Biden's, the Democratic nominee is going to win it in 2024. It's a tough, but it's not like, it's not Alabama. It's not like these look, it's like not a 65-35 state. Okay. JD Vance is running to be the representative for all the people in Ohio. And his response to this human tragedy was at Jack on Twitter, you got to let Trump back on. I got to see what he says about Baldwin. And I actually did a monologue on this on my show. I'm like, what a deranged antisocial thing to say. Like any human being with decency, again, across lines of class, race, religion, like I think just anyone is like, oh, what a terrible tragedy. When I was growing up, the kind of person who would say that would be the shock jock. And the shock jock would say that because the shock jock was in a very competitive attention market where there were 3 or 4 different shock jocks who were jostling for morning drive time attention. And their whole shtick was to get attention. So like that would be a very shock jock thing. Like the morning after this happened, the shock jock being like, oh, I'd love to see what Trump says about him. But like, and they do a whole riff about Baldwin. They make a lot of like disgusting jokes. Because of the fact that in a weird way, the intentional incentives of like drive time morning radio have now come to dominate all of culture and politics, you're selecting for shock jock attributes in your politicians. And this is a new and weird thing. Like it used to be the case that, to go back to your point about like people acting like politicians, it used to be the case that a politician's response to that would be like, if asked about it, like, what a terrible tragedy. That's it. All I got to say. Also, you're trying to make people like you. So the thing to do is to say a thing that's like broadly agreeable to the mass of people, which is like, what a human tragedy. You're not a shock jock. And I think this weird inversion that's happened where like the shock jock politician, which I think is produced by the intentional incentives, is really weird. And obviously Trump is the ultimate example of this. He is 100% a shock jock. Like even his acts, like everything about him is like a New York City drive time radio host. That has really changed things, I think, in politics.
It has, but as I listen to you say that, like the reason that these incentives are there is because to some extent they work on a lot of people, right? And Trump gets this. Like Trump knows that the spectacle of Trump is interesting to people who may not even be hardcore Trump supporters and believe his politics. And it does seem incredibly dangerous that, I mean, like, Trump always says this about the media, like, you guys will miss me. And a lot of people say, with, I think a lot of good reason, that there are like financial incentives for the media to keep covering Trump. But there's also, it's like the watching a car crash thing, just like slowing down as you go by a car crash phenomenon where you're right. Like it's gross what JD Vance says, but then if Trump was back on Twitter and did say something, everyone would want to look at what Trump said about that.
Yes,
because there's some, and that's horrible.
I mean, even the Elon Musk thing. I'm just like, can we not? I don't care. I don't care what this guy says. And yet, yeah. So that, yeah. But again, to come back to the car crash, because I think that's useful, right? So to bring it back around to that, like, why do we look at the car crash? Well, let's say, and this is why I think, and again, I'm talking my book here, right? This is like me thinking through this in a way. So let's say you're walking down the street, okay? You're lost in a daydream. You're thinking about a thing you have to do at work. your perceptual system's humming in the background, and it's taking in the information it needs to, like, for you to walk. It's almost doing it almost like, it's almost like sleepwalking, right? Like that thing where you drive to a place, happens in LA all the time, particularly. And like you get there and you're like, I don't remember a single second of that drive. Like I took 3 left turns and I couldn't tell you which ones, like it just happened, right? An amazing miracle of how the human perceptual system works. And all of a sudden, a car runs a red light and slams into a stop sign right by you, a few feet away from you, right? All of your attention is suddenly on that. And that's not volitional, okay? You can't control whether you pay attention to that or not. That is from the deepest parts of you. This is a thing that makes attention different than other parts of us, which is that it can be compelled involuntarily. So labor is another thing that is ours, the product of our thought and effort and toil. And it could be coerced from us, whether through, in the plantation system of chattel slavery, or through, you got to work to eat, but it can't be taken at the involuntary level. Like you actually have to do it. Attention can be taken at the involuntary level. And this makes it a more that aspect of it, that dimension of it. So when you talk about the car crash, there's a reason we talk about the car crash, because when you look over the car crash, now at that point, you're sort of doing it voluntarily, but the reason the car crash is doing that, and the reason that we have rubbernecking on the road, is because you've got a whole set of very complex and sophisticated psychological and cognitive processes that are looking out for things that will kill you. So
well, I mean, there is that, but that's on the like survival level, right? And this is all sort of involuntary. You talk about
no, but my point is there's a connection between the two, right? Like I think that those processes can be played with at a much higher level around things like threat, death, sex. Like when you go back to what was the earliest successful mass media in the tabloid penny press, it was all crime, death stuff.
Right. Yeah, that's not new. I mean, you mentioned in the piece that that George Saunders essay, The Brain Dead Megaphone, which I thought was the perfect sort of analogy for, and you mentioned you connect it to Trump, but also sort of how politics is today. Can you talk about the Brain Dead Megaphone a little bit? Well,
Saunders has this great essay he wrote in this essay collection where he talks about, and it's a critique, basically it's a critique of cable news in the run-up to the Iraq War. And he says, the cocktail party sort of metaphor I use, which is in reference to him, right? Is a sort of adjustment to his thought experiment. He talks about being at a cocktail party, everyone's talking, making polite conversation. Then there's one person who's got a megaphone, and all of a sudden it's like everything about the texture of the room changes. And they're like, these cheese cubes are good. And everyone's like, okay. Now everyone, he says, is interacting in reference to what the person, the megaphone says. And by the way, he does this riff. I can't reconstruct from memory. That's like a monologue of the person with the brain dead megaphone. He says, what if one person has a megaphone? And then what if they're not particularly bright? They're just like sort of loud, obnoxious, and kind of, and his monologue is like almost verbatim what a Trump monologue would be. And this is 15 years before Trump runs for office. And his point is that once that enters the room, like everything revolves around it. No conversation can now happen independent of the brain dead megaphone. And I think it does capture something profound about the Trump effect. And right now the Elon Musk effect, like when you get someone at the megaphone sort of barking things that everyone then is interacting in reference to.
Yeah, we actually talked about this on yesterday's Pod Save America. Lovett brought up the point that all of these Republican primaries now, there are zero policy discussions in the Republican primaries, that it's all about getting attention, negative attention, whether you're J.D. Vance or Josh Mandel or Dr. Oz or whoever these characters may be, that like the incentives are all aligned, at least on the Republican side, towards negative attention. Then I think back to 2020 and I'm like, well, Joe Biden did win the nomination and then the presidency on our side, and he's not brain dead megaphone guy.
No, he was the opposite. And in fact, I think that like that's again, like if you go back to the original point I was making about the shock jock, There's a reason politicians didn't used to talk like that, because alienating a ton of people was the literal opposite of what they wanted to do when running for office, which was to get as many people as possible to like them. I mean, Barack Obama, very likable guy, like really likable. I met him when he was a state senator, and he had a real talent for that. Served him well in his political career of like not going out of his way to alienate people. So and some of those incentives I think still pertain. Like, I mean, I think there are universes in which like Vance can't run. I think Vance will have problems running that version of himself in the general.
Offline is brought to you by Haya. Typical children's vitamins are basically candy in disguise, filled with 2 teaspoons of sugar, unhealthy chemicals, and other gummy junk growing kids should never eat. That's why Haya was created, the pediatrician-approved, super-powered, chewable vitamin. While most children's vitamins are filled with 5 grams of sugar and can contribute to a variety of health issues, Haya is made with 0 sugar and 0 gummy junk. Yet it tastes great and is perfect for picky eaters. Haya fills in the most common gaps in modern children's diets to provide the full-body nourishment our kids need with a yummy taste they love. Formulated with the help of nutritional experts, Haya is pressed with a blend of 12 organic fruits and veggies, then supercharged with 15 essential vitamins and minerals, including vitamin D, B12, C, zinc, folate, and many others to help support immunity, energy, brain function, mood, concentration, teeth, bones, and more. Haya is great. We have we've tried some Haya vitamins with Charlie, and it's nice not to give him sugar, to give him something that's really healthy, and he still likes it. So they're pretty great vitamins, better than like the other brand we had when we were all kids that was just sugary crap, I won't say it here, but we all know what it is. We've worked out a special deal with Haya for their best-selling children's vitamin. Receive 50% off your first order. To claim this deal, you must go to hayahealth.com/offline. The deal is not available on their regular website. Go to HIYAHEALTH.com/offline and get your kids the full body nourishment they need to grow into healthy adults. Today's episode is sponsored in part by Seeker, a new independent search engine that prioritizes transparency, choice, and control, streamlining access to reliable information online. Just think, no more clickbait, no more hidden agendas, no more slanted search results favoring profits over people, no more spreading misinformation. With Seeker, you can finally start to feel good about what you read. Here's how it works. Powered by artificial intelligence, each news search result comes with its own Seeker score, a rating that determines how reliable an article is based on criteria like subjectivity, clickbait, incoherence, and title exaggeration. You can also filter your search results by political lean left, center, or right, making it easier to get all sides of a story. Know before you click. To get started, visit seeker.com/crooked so they know we sent you. That's SEEKR.com/crooked. Seek for yourself today, because transparency matters. Offline is brought to you by the new documentary series, Will Be Wild. On January 6th, thousands stormed the U.S. Capitol on Trump's urging. He had tweeted, "Be there, will be wild." From critically acclaimed podcast studios Pineapple Street and Wondery comes a new documentary series called Will Be Wild. It shines a light on the human stories left out of the January 6th headlines and goes deep into the lives of people who took part in the day, the people who saw it coming, and the people who feared that January 6th was just the beginning. You'll hear from former U.S. intelligence members who warned about the incredible rise of violent extremists in America, a former soldier charged with seditious conspiracy, and a son who turned his father into the FBI. Will Be Wild is a close-up look at the 4-year effort to bring autocracy to America and what the insurrection could mean for the future of our democracy. Follow Will Be Wild wherever you get your podcasts, or you can listen early on Amazon Music or early and ad-free by subscribing to Wondery Plus and Apple Podcasts or the Wondery app. So, you are a famous person, known by millions, who's also very online. How has that experience changed who you are, how you think, how you interact with others? Have you thought about that?
Oh, I thought about it a lot. Yes, a lot of thinking about it, a lot of therapy. I mean, I'm not even kidding. Like, I think that my first 3 or 4 years of it, the experience of it was, I think the earliest period when I first started appearing on television as a guest was kind of like fun in a kind of pure way. And I've always been a performer. I did acting in high school and in college. I did a lot of theater. I've always liked performing. And so was, I think, disposed towards it, acclimated towards it. I think I've always had like an attention thing. I've wanted people to pay attention to me, which is not universal at all. Lots of people are the total opposite, but I was already in that category. Then I had the experience of getting the primetime show. And the first 4 or 5 years of that was like really pretty psychologically difficult. And messed me up pretty bad, I would say. Like, I think that, the the way that I describe it is there's an episode of The Simpsons in which Bart is working for the mafia and they hijack a cigarette truck. And then when they take the stolen cigarettes, they hide them all in Bart's room. And so Homer walks in and there's like thousands of cartons of cigarettes in Bart's room. And he's like, Bart, are you smoking? And Bart's like, no. He's like, I'm going to make you sit here and smoke every one of these cigarettes. Which is like an old timey way that you would like cure a kid or a teenager who wanted to smoke. And the way that I think about the first few years of like real public life fame was like, oh, you like people paying attention to you? Well, here's 1,000 cartons of cigarettes of people paying attention to you. Do you still like it? And so what had to happen was, and I think the reason that I wrote that essay and the reason that I have spent so much time about it was at both an emotional and psychological level, but also an intellectual level, I had to sort of go back and reconstruct in myself, why does it matter what a stranger thinks about me? What does that do to me as a person? Why do I care? How should I orient? What are the things I value? What are the relationships I value in my life? Like, how do I, to me, the really difficult thing is because I think people go in the opposite direction. Like there's definitely there's a Kanye temptation of like, F the hater. Like, I don't care. I don't care what anyone thinks about me. It's like, well, caring what other people think about you is kind of the foundation of like, civilization. So you don't want to go that far of like, I don't care what anyone thinks about me. But you can't care too much, and you have to sort of figure out how you manage that, how you manage those psychological inputs.
Yeah. I mean, there's also a utilitarian case for why people like you and I care about what people think of us. We're both doing jobs where we're trying to persuade other human beings. We have certain beliefs that we're trying to pass on to other people, that we have strong beliefs about politics and opinions. And if everyone stopped paying attention to us or caring about us, or if we said things that pissed a lot of people off, then the people that we're trying to reach may not listen to us. And you're always, so I find that like it was so much easier in some ways. I thought about like, and maybe this is because I come from an academic background and I love like being in college so much. But when I was writing speeches for Obama, like you could sort of think out loud during the speech draft, right? Like, what is the argument we're making in the speech? How do we get it just right? How do we get the nuance right? How do we say, oh, this is mistaken, this is too harsh, this isn't harsh enough, right? And you go back and forth, and then you finally have the draft. Now, it's sort of like you're always playing with live ammo. You're just talking, right? You prepare, right? I prepare for the pod, all that kind of stuff. But your tweets, everything else, it's just out there. And there's less room for error in sort of groping for an answer, a conclusion. You just kind of have to keep going. And it's a little bit more of a high wire act.
It is a little more of a high wire act. I think it also like it weirdly incentivizes certainty, or the performance of certainty in a way, like, which I think is bad. But I mean, I think the argument you're making is right, but like just being 1,000% real talk honest here, like that's the intellectual or like utilitarian way wasn't the reason that it was like messing with my like chest. Like the thing I'm feeling in my sternum and in my viscera and in my like that stuff is like, that's deep stuff. That's like, it's like why am I walking around today feeling like I just went through a breakup, or like a person that like I love isn't talking to me? It's like I got into a fight on Twitter, or someone said a mean thing about my show, and it's like whoa. Let's take a step back here. Why is that producing the visceral physiological response in you of intense relational emotional drama? Like
this is why I try not to fight on Twitter anymore. Emily always says this to me. She's like, I can tell when you're sitting there looking at your phone. She's like, and your jaw is clenched.
Yep.
She's like,
Yep.
and your jaw's going, and there's times when you're just not paying attention because you're reading the news, and then there's times when I know that you're pissed off in a Twitter fight. She's like, and I can tell from your face the difference between those two modes. I mean, how often do you and Kate think about what growing up in an era of mass fame and mass surveillance will do to your kids? Because I have an almost 2-year-old and now think about this constantly with Charlie.
I think about it all the time. I mean, I think about it at two levels, right? So I think about the social media level, and I think about it like, it's sort of a bummer to have famous parents. Like, the funny thing here is that like Kate's dad was a very extremely well-known Chicago political reporter. And he really loomed large in Chicago, in the city. Yeah. Yes, of course. He was covered Barack Obama early and was around all the time. His name's Andy Shaw. He's a great, really, truly like incredible, top-notch political reporter. Like, it's like they don't make him like that anymore. Like what he was able to do, he would do 3 or 4 minute story. Like he was just like, he owned this beat and was like a true real reporter in this incredible way. But he had this enormous, like, if you go out to a restaurant with Andy Shaw in Chicago, like everyone in the room looks like he was very famous in Chicago. And so Kate grew up with that. So that's the other weird layer to that. And so there's that level. And then there's the social media level. And then there's the, like, what are we passing on? My parents, like my dad is like a kind of Midwestern Irish Catholic who is a community organizer who was a Jesuit seminarian. Like he does not have what I'm stealing this term from a podcast, a friend and podcast host I listen to named Luke Burbank, who I think the term came from his ex-wife, who referred to it as the show-off demon, which I think is that he had the show-off demon. And I love that term. I think about it all the time. Like my dad does not have the show-off demon. My mom doesn't really, although she's from the Bronx and has, she's got opinions. She's from this Italian-American Bronx family, but like neither of them have the show-off demon really. And I wonder sometimes, like, where did I get it from? And am I passing it on to my kids? Are my kids going to get this inheritance, whether through upbringing or genetics or whatever, to have the show-off demon, to want strangers to pay attention to them? Like, part of me hopes not. I mean, mostly I hope not. So I think about it at like those two levels, right? There's the like, what is it to be a young social media native person in America? And then also like, what does it mean to have parents that are sort of in public life?
Yeah, no, I mean, Emily and I both have the show-off demon, so that's what makes me worried for Charlie. And that's why I always think, I'm like, if nothing else, I just want him to be kind, empathetic, like figure out how to have that recognition of others. Like as you start to like try to mold them from a young age, I feel like that's like my overriding goal. Like if I could just get him to be a kind, selfless person, then we'll be okay. Because I do worry that not just his parents, but just the incentive structure that we've been talking about on social media, in the internet, is just totally in the other direction now.
Yeah. And I think there's two levels, right? There's like the core level when you're producing a kid, when you're raising a child. Like kindness, empathy, being able to like truly listen to other people and to mentally model what their states are. I mean, I'm sure, you have a 2-year-old, so you're very early in this, but I have 3 kids, 10, 8, and 4. And like, it's a lot of like, well, how do you think your sister felt when you said that? How do you like a lot of that, right? Like, oh, I don't want to do that. I'm like, well, the whole family is getting up and helping to clean up right now. So if you don't feel that way, like look around you, look at how everyone is contributed. Like it's a lot of like, think outside yourself, think outside yourself, think outside yourself. How do other people respond? How do other people think? What are like a lot of teaching empathy. But the other skill, the skill that to me is so important, and I think I developed later in life, and is partly the product of therapy, is like, you're feeling a lot of things all the time, and being able to just take one step up the ladder of abstraction, sit there inside your own body and mind and look down at what's happening in it, and why that feeling is in your chest, or what that is in your cheeks, or what is it? Name the feeling that you're feeling right now. Oh, that's anger. Huh. Well, why are you angry? And then figure out what's going on there. That to me is like so important in the social media world too, because you watch people lose it lose it in public because and I sympathize, but it's like they are losing it because they cannot in the moment take the second to walk up one step of abstraction and be like, why am I tweeting these things at this stranger? Why am I doing this? I need to step away. And it's like, so that ability, I'm not saying like I'm amazing at it, because Lord knows I can lose it too. But that is the ability to me. That's a more developed one. That's a hard one to teach certainly a 2-year-old, even a 6 or 7-year-old. I mean, that's something that comes, I think, with like full adult sort of self-actualization a little bit. But that is a really key thing to me. That is, and again, I say this coming out of the like those first few years of the show that were brutal on me psychologically, working very hard to get to that level, to be able to walk one level up. That to me is really important.
40 years old, still working on it. I mean, as someone who like internalizes all those things until the point where it actually like affects my physical health.
Right. Yes.
Yes, I can tell you that I'm still working on it. Last 2 questions I'm asking all our guests. What were you doing the last time you realized you needed to put your phone down? And what's your favorite way to unplug?
Needed to put my phone down was probably literally this morning, getting my daughter ready for school. My youngest daughter ready for school. It's like, there's something about the morning that's tough, because it's like, particularly like you and I are speaking I don't know if you don't want to time date this or not, but we're speaking the morning after a draft opinion overturning Roe v. Wade leaked. There's that feeling in my head of just oh my God, but then also like, I got to do a show tonight that's going to be about this. So I need to be, who are we booking? What are we? So there's like that clock is ticking in the back of my head. We're counting down till 8 p.m. But it's also like, I have this morning with my kids. And so that was, the last time. It's like a few hours ago. In terms of unplugging, like I have found, family hikes are great for unplugging. I've been cooking a lot more recently. I make pasta with my kids, and that has become this really cool tradition. Kate's an incredible cook and baker, and she makes bread. Again, these are both like sort of a little pre-pandemic, but really got sort of flowered in the pandemic, and now we kept doing them. But I find just the tactile nature, and like making fresh pasta for a bunch of people takes a really long time. So it's like a few hours of just focus, and we put on Italian music in the background. And so that's been really, really great. Also chopping wood.
Wow,
really
look at you.
I really like chopping wood as sort of a Zen thing, and sort of chopping up trees and doing that kind of thing. But it's a struggle all the time. I mean, again, I'm not like any sort of model for anyone in my online habits.
No, the best answers tend to be things where like you really do have to use both hands to do the activity, so that you can't even have one hand holding the phone. Chopping wood, making bread, that kind of stuff. Chris Hayes, thank you so much for joining Offline. Really appreciate it.
This was great.